see how limited that information is. What is this then? If we look at this information, so now we add that map. What does this give us? So now we can see where each of those regions are. We can start to see then, okay, so where is Upper West? Comparison to Greater Accra. But still, can you see then that we still have very limited information? But at least we've added something more. We've started to put a spatial component into that information that we have on the statistical information. What about this? That's the same information, but represented as geospatial information, as presented on a map. So from this information you can see now that we have not only where are the different regions of Ghana, but we're also showing the population information, and you can now also see the relationships between those. Look at the population of Upper West compared to Greater Accra. You can see now in a spatial context, visually, what that information means. We know that in the whole decision-making process, that we need to bring in the signals that we get from the environment. We process that information through to create knowledge to feed into a decision-making process. So we have then evidence-based decision-making, or decision-making that is based on the relevant information for that purpose. That will then give implementation to those decisions, and we can then monitor the impact, because those decisions would have an impact on the environment, and we can monitor that. So you can see through this model the role that geospatial information does play in the whole decision process. And as I said, geospatial information is best represented on maps. Maps gives order to chaos. We know our world is very chaotic out there. The amount of information we actually have today is really very chaotic. So map starts to give us order to this chaos. Our brain can only process so much. So we need to provide what is relevant and order in which to meet the need of the user. Do that then through some of the basic tasks that we get, such as map reading, map interpretation, and map analysis. The typical things that you'll do in a computer system, but also in the brain, you can do these things as well. Because that's where you're really making the decision, is in the brain. You know how big the human brain is. I think it's only about 1.4 kilograms in size. So it's a lot we're trying to pack into this little brain that we have. So we need to try and make sure that what we're putting into the brain for the decision is then relevant. But we see now in modern cartography, in the modern world, that the maps that we had many years ago, we're starting to now change the way in which we are representing geospatial information. More into the areas of cartographic visualization. So then let's look a bit more at cartographic visualization. And we can see on the axis from the area of visualization through to straight communication. We have here the human map interaction. So along this axis you have the low amount of interaction required, where here you have a much greater level of interaction required. Information becomes more public as it moves up, more private as it is down here. And very importantly, we can see that in this area here, if we work in this area of the cube, the visualization cube, that is generally where we'll be doing the map reading type of tasks. You know, the more simple type of tasks, where we're doing straight communication, which is more public, lower interaction with the human, and also it is more presenting the knowns, things that are there. You can see what they are. by straight map reading. But more importantly, we can see that there's also this area of revealing unknowns. So this is an important axis to consider as well. Is that what is presenting knowns and that what is revealing unknowns. And that's what I was trying to say, that if you look at some of the statistical information, often we're only getting what is presenting the knowns. What is there? In other words, it is more up in this area. Whereas what we're looking at when you're looking at information on a map, we start to move further down this axis, more into this area down here. So let's then look at some more examples then of this. Let's take this map. So this is based on the Millennium Development Goals, a report that was presented showing infant mortality. And you can see it's been graded on the amounts, on those thematic groupings. What does that tell you? You can see there that there's some explicit information provided. You can see that for these countries that are colored in red on the map have a very high infant mortality rate, whereas those in blue have much lower infant mortality rate. So that is explicit information. That's the presenting the knowns. But when you interpret this map, when you go to map interpretation, or the analysis of this, you start to then uncover, to reveal the unknowns. You start to gain new information out of just looking at this map. What else can you see from this map? What does it tell you by looking at this? In other words, it's not explicit information presented. Because there is explicit information presented to you. It tells you for each country what the infant mortality rate is. Well, certainly for me, if you tell me I wouldn't like to have a child in one of those countries. Not so. Very high infant mortality rates. Healthcare issues are very high in those countries. So healthcare in those countries should be a high priority of government. Much better to have a child, been raising a child in those countries there, where obviously the healthcare systems are much better. Isn't that the type of information that is now being revealed to you by having this information presented on a map? You can see those spatial relationships that do not exist in just tabulated information. If you look at this map, this is geospatial information. We know that if you look at the information on here, that is very complex geospatial information. If you take an extract out of a database, be it an Oracle, spatial cartridge database, or whatever, you get lots of coordinates and other bits of information. It might be relational, it might be object-based or whatever. But it's very complex. It won't be easy for you to read that information, print it out of the database, and make sense of it. Yet, by presenting that same information on a map, you can see the difference in the interpretation of that information. So, you can see now, by looking at the map, we're about to get an interpretation of what exists there. Okay, so that's a lot of industrial area, in actual fact, warehouses. We can see from this information, there's a lot of harbour wharfs and jetties there. So what does it tell us? We know then that these are components of a harbour. Just by looking at it, we can see. Okay, I know this is Durban, you should all know Durban. But you can see the fact that these things start to create these spatial relationships that become explicit on a map. things that you wouldn't see in a database. And we know that a harbour, those relationships, and obviously a harbour needs to then be connected into an ocean. So you can see these spatial relationships being shown through this representation on a map. Here's a representation of elevation, and we know there are different ways of representing elevation. This is just a shaded relief model, but we could show it in a gridded model as well, a three-dimensional model. Different ways in which we can visualize this information. Let's look at some of the more modern ways of representing geospatial information. We can see now that we have virtual reality systems. We have these 3D type of representations that we can now see using maps. Or location-based services. Location-based services, I think, is given as one of the fastest growing sectors of economies. So many people these days are using location-based services, and at the heart of location-based services is your map. You know, I always point out to people when they tell me that in their motor car they have a GPS. I'll say, no, you don't have a GPS in your motor car. You have an in-car navigation system. Because the GPS only tells you where you are. It doesn't tell you where you need to go to. Okay, so you need a GPS and a map. And obviously the software around it to then give you the directions. Right, so this year has been declared International Map Year. We love maps. This is an initiative to celebrate the role of maps in society. Thank you.